guest today is on both sides and a very dear friend for a long, long time. His name is Bennett Zimmerman. He is an American, grew up in Long Beach, born in Philly. He was a strategy consultant with major Fortune 500 or 100 firms in the States. He went to Harvard. He also, as well as his business side, worked in the record industry at BMG. He also began at a very strategic time the Israel Emerging Fund, which was to encourage people to invest in Israel and Israeli stocks and companies, which at the time was very innovative. Now everybody's doing it. He's also written a book for kids on finances called Go Stock Go, introducing kids to the stock market. And he has, in the last number of years, created an organization called the Rock Justice Awards, which is part of his passion for the music industry. And his best connection to Australia, or the nicest one, is that he is an absolute ardent fan of the very original Little River Band that came out of Australia. Now, I'm telling you all of this because we're not going to talk about any of that, but we will have him back when Morris is here. Today, I've got Bennett Zimmerman all to myself as a friend, and to talk to us about some of his adventures and some of his thoughts on life and good things like that. Bennett, welcome to the studios with me.
Good day. Good day. I'm glad to be in Australia.
I'm so glad you can say that now. Good day.
And it is my third time here. My last two times I went to every state and both of the major territories, and I thought it would be my last time here, but the people are so marvelous, I had to come back.
Well, we love to hear that. And I haven't been to every state in Australia, so that makes you even more impressive.
One must do so by intention. It doesn't happen by accident.
That's very true. And what was your intention in doing that?
Well, I had been to all 50 states in the U.S., so there was no more to visit, and then all 10 provinces in Canada and 3 major territories, and so, of course, I had to go through the list. Actually, I think when you visit a lot of different places in quick succession to each other, or if you go on a European holiday and see countries next to country, you can see the finer differences between them.
And the differences between countries is certainly interesting and often obvious, but the differences in states, in countries, is not always so obvious. So what are the differences here in Australia, in our different states?
Well, actually, I think it is a unified national identity. I think it's really more by geography. You know, Queensland is more towards the Great Barrier Reef, and coastal communities more of the tropics. And then I think there's, of course, the Great Outback, which is similar wherever you go. But as a tourist destination, I wouldn't skip even one of them. Darwin, I loved the fact that I couldn't go into the water because of the crocodiles, or because of the jellyfish floating around. And then Perth reminded me a lot of Los Angeles, the weather, and even driving into the California-like forests. But hands down, my favorite place in Australia is Melbourne. It's a city that seems like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York all at the same time.
So great to hear, since we are, in fact, in Melbourne. But so visually, of course, all the states are completely different. But also you're travelling on your own, which also offers a greater opportunity to mix and meet with people, new people. Did you find a difference in people in different states?
Well, I think actually I think that America went through its great last struggle in the civil rights struggle of the 60s, where the South was much different than the North, and also a lot of the northern cities had problems with race as well. And I think that's when the year I was born, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. made the "I Have a Dream" speech, which, by the way, all of his biblical references are from the Jewish Bible or the Torah, and setting that prophetic vision of peace, including that he might not get to the promised land. And as we know, he was killed, but he became like an American of Moses. I by the time I got to first grade in 1970, I thought America was really on a path where it had self-improved almost to perfection as a nation. And so it is a strong democracy.
Very different from today. But getting back to Australia, so are you saying that the people that you actually met and interacted with and spoke to were pretty much the same, whether you're in the Northern Territory or whether you were in Sydney?
Well, I would describe it more as that I found Australia to be more like the United States than any place I've been, because everyone has a self-confident identity they define by being Australia. Americans define themselves by being American. Without any offense to anyone from Canada or New Zealand, a Canadian will define themselves in relation to how they're not like the U.S. or they live within 100 miles, about 150 kilometers of the U.S. border. New Zealanders tend to tell you how they are distinct from Australia. And an Australian will say, I've never been out of the country, or maybe been out of the country once or twice, or so there is a self-confidence that your own destiny is linked in Australia. So I found that Australians are actually a very unified nation.
Did you find that you, particularly being on your own, did you find that you connected with people that were at the places, that the venues that you met? Were they mainly families or of people from overseas or actual Australians?
I tend to stay in hotels to get a bit of the international common experience and the common news. But I found Australians universally are friendly. You can talk to so many of them. It has 1/13 the population of the USA, with similar land size to the lower 48, as we call them, except for Alaska. And I found that people I admired in the arts or so forth, it was easy to contact them, and either by Facebook and they'd say, well, let's meet for a catch-up. So I found that accessibility, and most of them are in Sydney or Melbourne, people you would want to meet. They're open, or they're doing a show, you go down and see them, say hello, and they're very open to having a full discussion or being your friends. That would not happen in the States.
That's interesting. That's an interesting comment, because in business I find it the flip. People are far easier to connect with on business in the States than they are here in Australia. But I digress. Did you also meet some native Aboriginal people in your travels?
I went on... I honestly can't say that I have. I took some of the tours around Ayers Rock, Uluru, if I said that correctly, and from a different perspectives. And some were telling the Aboriginal story, and others were telling it just more from geography. And I tried to be, it's not my national story, but I will say this, I have found that Australia, more so than any other nation, has people talk about Australia Day, the controversies, but I actually found that Australians get along very well. You see the Aboriginal flag, it flies equal with the Australian flag. I saw in many of the celebrations, there's much of the entertainment, the cultural aspects, or whenever someone begins a meeting here, they say this was first of this tribe. And so the sensitivity of Australians towards each other, I think, is remarkable. And I'll say one more thing. I know that some people, it's not for me to take a position, it's only to observe. I don't know any other country that has done as much, and so I think Australians should pat themselves on the back for jobs well done rather than looking for what's not right. I think it's very impressive as it is.
That is so nice to hear from somebody who's not only visited, but visited the whole of Australia as well, so knows. Do you find yourself talking to, say, when you're being served in a restaurant, the wait staff, or in a store, do you get into conversations with the person serving you, that sort of thing?
Yes, and they tend to find my accent charming. They can spot me immediately through that accent, and certainly Australians always say good day or hello.
And what's it like actually traveling on your own for extended periods of time?
Sometimes it's great, because it can see and do what I want, or if I want to do something a little out of budget, like I've taken my first helicopter rides in Australia.
How exciting!
Sometimes it's affordable on one's own. The other time in Perth, I think I was feeling a little under the weather. I decided to just watch movies for 2 days and sometimes give myself a break and just be
so you can
just
do
relax. You can't do that if you're on a group tour where you have to show up at 7:30. And because of the English, Australians speak better English than Americans. We have limited vocabulary in the States. Yes, I think anyone that comes from from Britain or the British Commonwealth tend to have better educations. I remember when Tony Blair showed up and spoke to Congress, people were amazed, and all he did was speaking English. and Americans, maybe we are simpler. But I was
going to comment, but you went to Harvard. I mean, everybody exalts these places.
The H-bomb, as they call it. Well, I went to Dartmouth College for my undergraduate university studies, which I quite love, and I went to Harvard Business School. I enjoyed the students. Here I'll say something controversial all the way in Melbourne. I think Harvard is an institution with a large endowment, and maybe they should make education free for the best qualified students. I don't know. It's the rich giving to the rich. And not that I'm against the rich, but I'll just call it a fact.
Yes, and I would love to do a whole program on just that on its own, because in addition to the funding that it and the funds that it receives, Harvard today is also like the majority of universities around the world that's subjected to political and politically incorrect attitudes. And I'm trying not to get political on the show, but you keep raising my ire about these things.
I'll say something just to make the show interesting. I think one of the characteristics I noted at Harvard Business School is there was an equal number of undergraduates from Harvard, from Yale, Princeton, and also from Dartmouth College, where I went to my undergrad. And I thought that the Dartmouth students and the Yaleys could engage in debate from day one, because they had Yale always tries to keep up with Harvard. Dartmouth was a very social campus, and they had a variety of conservative and liberal viewpoints at the school, whereas the Harvard students are probably the most qualified going in, but they're told for 4 years, you're smart, you're brilliant, you have good ideas, and so they weren't challenged to challenge their own ideas. And this institution produces so many policies in the United States and the world without having to really argue or to fully vet them out. And it's one point I would make, that people use the word sustainable. They say, here's a program and it's meant to be sustainable. As a strategy consultant, I learned what are the different options, and let's try to measure what are the results that are considered success that is sustainable, and what are the same measurements that would say it's not sustainable and your policy is wrong. And I find that if government policy develops from a university that does not have real world testing, we tend to get policies that become institutionalized without a test, and this
is why Donald Trump is testing all of those past theories and acceptabilities of government, which is fine. And again, don't want to get into politics, but
I won't. And I will say, of course, look, whether it was Bernie Sanders on the far left or Donald Trump on the right, there is a feeling in America. There was an anti-establishment movement. I have to say, though, coming from America, the discourse between right and left is unacceptable.
Totally.
I believe as president, it's his job to reach to the center and to speak more kindly, whatever his ideas are. And I think that the most important issue in America is that left and right learn to speak to each other with respect. It has to start from the top. That is his responsibility. And whatever happened to something called debate, which we learned in high school, or you would call colleges here, to take an opposing point of view and to argue it.
Social media has killed the debate.
Well, actually, I think bringing debate back in the original form might actually be a cure for what's happening on social media, because that it's an intense hour of views on both sides. So that might be something that would be of interest. But I do want to say that I doubt very much that if you went back to Harvard today, it would be anywhere near the institution it was when you were there. It's just students are being used in politics so badly. But going back to this fun stuff you've been doing, which is traveling around the world, so you did all 50 states of the US first, and then progressed on to Australia. But what was the impetus actually for you deciding to do this travel?
Well, besides when I was working at Bennett Company in consulting, we used to have these maps we would fill in the states. And because of the business travel, we get to 25 or 27 of the 50 states, and there becomes a point of inevitability where it became a competition. And you can't complete all 50 unless, if you're visiting an adjacent one, sometimes you would drive over and say, from Tennessee, say, "Hi, is this Mississippi?" And they'd say, "It sure is." And I'd say, "I need to touch the ground and eat something." I ordered some French fries. And eventually, though, I have slept in each state to make sure it's a proper visit. But there are rules to these games. I would say it's, first of all, there is something different I can say about each of them. I love America. I love its people. And you do learn distinctions. Common media in the old days, we used to watch the same news, we used to have the same top 40 charts, and there was more of a unified culture. You're correct. Now, Dominic was saying, Facebook or social media, people only talk within their own camps. And something that I learned as a kid, an uncle of mine, Uncle Joe, up looking from above, he said, I think it was Rousseau who said, "I will fight to the death for your right to have an opposing view," or something of this nature.
Voltaire.
Oh, Voltaire. Yes, I'm an American. I'm uneducated.
Sorry, I studied French literature.
Well, I'm glad you did. Don't start with French with me. It's the one language I've been told I should never attempt to speak. But there was he said something once. He said, "Do not label someone with a view. Hear their viewpoint, but don't list them as you liberal, you this, you conservative, that, and just take it point by point. And each person has a name, and show them respect."
And actually, that's really what the point of these programs are. While Morris is away, these are to show that people are people. They're very complex human beings, and they're people that have histories that you have no idea about until you really get to know them. And there's no need for you to. I remember from my final year exam, there was a question that said, "No man is an island," and you had to write a paper on that.
He's a piece of the continent, I think. Yeah. The next slide.
So, but it is, no person is an island, but they are an island unto themselves, because they are unique. They're unique in their experiences. They're unique in the way that they react to their experiences, and they're unique in the way they see the world. So even the views they have can, in fact, be very different. So what I was always also, I'm blessed to be your Facebook friend, because
we've been more than I knew you before Facebook.
Way before Facebook, we were real friends.
Right.
But what I get to see on Facebook is so much more of what you're experiencing as you're traveling, which is wonderful. But the part that also interests me are all the people that just love and adore you the way I do. I thought it was just me. Can you say a couple of things about this worldwide friendship base that you have and that are connected to?
Well, look, sometimes I go through the list of Facebook friends and I say, would I really have dinner with some? Or actually, if they were in the same town, would we actually hang out together? Sometimes the distance allows communication when you're ready for the communication. And so it used to be email. Remember the days when we had to call people? You would have to catch them up on years and years. And
write letters.
writes letters, yes.
Actually, I still have 2 friends that send Christmas letters with a summary of everything that's happened in the year. But go ahead.
Remind me to come back to actually handwriting. It's an issue for me. But I think... why have I made so many friends in Australia? It's besides the fact that we share a common language and there is a common pop culture, which I've admired here, especially. It's the time difference. When I am, it's always 5 or 6 or 7 hours before LA, just the next day. And so if I'm at midday, there's people just getting up at 6 or 7 on Facebook, or late at night. I sometimes have sleep problems. If it's 2 in the morning, it's 9 o'clock it might be 9 o'clock in the evening here, and people are up and they're writing. And so when the United States sleeps, who is there to talk to? And there's not the same language comfort with people in Europe or Israel or so forth. But Australia, you certainly speak it the language.
I get all of that, but there's something a little deeper, because people aren't just connecting with you because it's convenient for you either. There's also there's a really genuine affection for who and what you are, and what you're putting out there is obviously really resonating.
But I will say Australians are actually extremely honest people, and they'll write what they like, what their frank opinion is. If you ask for an evaluation, they will provide one, and they also ask for advice back. And so I think that they are willing to engage.
And be real.
Yeah.
There are just a couple of things I want to go back to. I mentioned that you wrote a book for kids called Go Stock Go. Do you want to just mention a little bit about that and the fact that it is on Amazon?
Well, it's a Dr. Seuss-like book on the stock market for kids. It's called a Go Stock Go. A stock market guide for enterprising children and their curious parents, everything you were afraid your kids would ask. And I have never liked the jargon of economic textbooks, and so I tell it through the story of a family that buys a portfolio together. They learn lessons of risk and reward, and then there is an advanced section called Let's Talk Stock. But many people don't learn the fundamentals of how do you decide whether a stock is fairly valued. What is a stock? It's a piece of a company. It's a company that sells and has costs and either makes or loses money, and you own a piece of it. And I try to show that with cartoons and pictures in a non-intimidating way for kids, but also for adults who might never have picked it up in the first place.
Sounds simple enough for adults to understand, which is great. So I really wanted to give that a plug, and it's available at Amazon. Bennett Zimmerman, author, Go Stock Go.
It's my only book up there now, so you'll find it. My next book I'd like, which now commits me to writing it this year, is one. It's maybe explains to the world, but really to Americans, to explain the electoral college system. We have a very unique system in the states where each state selects electors to send to Washington, which then vote for the president. And there's a lot of discussion about it, but I want to give the background to it. And again, use the same characters as I used in Go Stock Go, learning about it, having differing views, and coming to understand why the United States chose such a system and why it exists until today.
I look forward to that coming out. I actually have a visual, just a one slide that I've actually kept on my phone that's just a visual of the electoral college system, so remind me later.
Okay.
So that's excellent. We look forward to that coming out as well. And then also, you've had an interest for a long time, as I mentioned, in the Little River Band, an Australian group, the original group. Do you want to just give us, tell us a little bit about how you got fascinated with them, how they themselves have evolved and what an exciting part of your trip this is at the moment.
Well, first of all, with having 21,000 CDs, I'm quite an audiophile in general.
OMG, Dominic only has 17,000.
Only 17,000 songs on my computer.
Okay.
And I have to really go through them because I actually bought the collection of a friend of ours, Avi Davis from Los Angeles, who passed away too young at 57. And his son said, my father collected collections, and I said, I don't want to see it broken up. So there's quite I have to arrange them. I have a history of Australian rock and roll sitting in one of my rooms at home.
Because Avi Davis was, in fact, an Australian, and he did go too quickly, but spent the latter years in America, and also Israel was also a great Zionist and
yes,
lover.
He built a home in Swat. But my own interest in Australian music was we used to have something. I was born in 63. In 75 we had pen friends. You would write a pen pal, we called them in America.
Yes.
And she was from Tamworth, New South Wales, which I understand is the country music capital. And she was telling me about a group called Sherbet, which has How's That, which
I've heard of them.
You have heard of them. It was a massive English world hit with the exception of the United States. And then I listened to American Top 40. I was very much into the charts. And then in 1976, a band called Little River Band broke through with a song called It's a Long Way There. And then they continued to have in the States, I think in some respects their success, they were huge here, but they had 7 years in a row where they had 8 top 10 hits, none of them disco during the disco era. So they were a rock band that held the fort during that era. They sold 30 million records, one of them called Reminiscing, which John Lennon and Frank Sinatra called the best song of the 70s.
Wow, did not know that.
And they sold so many names, and they All for One and All for the Band. As they retired from the band, the last American member standing in the group assumed the name. The way the paperwork was set up and written is that as the Australian members, the ones who wrote the songs, sang the songs, performed 600 concerts in the States, they lost the rights, according to an Australian court, to call themselves the Little River Band.
Wow. So all the proceeds that would have come from the publishing and everything as well.
Well, they keep the publishing and they keep the sales, but there's a lucrative concert market. There's 100 cities in the U.S. that would support such a market. When they wanted to get back as original Little River Band, the ones who owned the rights to the name stopped them or harassed promoters and say,
wow,
you can only have such a small size calling yourselves Little River Band. In fact, littleriverband.com in the States blocks anyone from Australia from going to the site because they are afraid of the Australians telling the truth.
How fascinating.
None of you wrote or sang these songs. So it's I have a project called the Rock Justice Awards. I find many artists. We've done concerts in LA, and I don't know if it's a concert or an essay or maybe they should appear on American TV, but I believe that the writers deserve to be known by their own names, whether you use the name Band, Little, or River ever again. And
so this is really one of the impetuses for me having you on here as well, because you had a passion. You had a passion to travel, and you fulfilled that. You did something about it. You had a passion for this rock music, and so you collected and you kept a history, and so this passion sort of then drove you on to the next passion, which is this Rock Justice Awards. And the Rock Justice Awards, I'm going to ask you to tell us about it, but just from my perspective, I found it amazing that you would find a way to actually meet these people that were also your heroes and people that you really wanted to meet as a child. You created the opportunity to then not only meet them but honor them. And that was a choice, and that was a way to go, and I really mean way to go.
I've just come back from throwing a concert for a group called The Association, which Australians would know the song. Everyone knows it's Windy. And actually, Cherish, which was made popular here by David Cassidy, is a huge #1 hit by The Association in the States. And 3 of the top 100 most played songs in the United States over the past centuries were by this group. They're not as well known here, but we just did a concert in LA. I named them top 5 artists for all time, given the amount of radio airplay, and top vocal group in 3,000 years, thinking they must have sounded as good as the people singing in King Solomon's temple. So that's how I came up with 3,000 years. And it was a wonderful love fest of finding their intense fans and bringing them together.
You also created a concert in Israel for one of your...
that's actually for an American artist named John Ford Coley. England and John Ford Coley had 10 hits in the States. They had a big one in Australia called I'd Really Love to See You Tonight. And he wanted to do a concert in Israel. And then from that, I saw what he was a virtuoso player, a one-man orchestra on piano or guitar. So we brought him to LA, and at the studios, he played Elton John's piano. Literally, that's the studio where Elton John records, and his guitar. And he too had a massive reception of fans who loved him from the day, and so yes, John was one of our honorees.
Tell us a little bit about the Rock Justice Awards that you're...
So, as I said, we've done something with the Association, which is an American institution. Some ways I call them the Australian Skyhook. Maybe that's wrong or right, I don't know. John Ford Coley, an alternative artist named Adam Marsland, who played 2,000 sessions, and we surprised him with how many hundreds of fans came out of the woodworks and really appreciated his work, even though he worked more behind the scenes. I want to do, before we're done, a conversation with Yoko Ono. I think she has something interesting to say. I want to give her that respect. What did she and John Lennon talk about? What were the points she made up? And actually, Yoko Ono has done something interesting. She gave £10,000 a year to the Liverpool Holocaust Museum, and she developed an exhibit called Sand and Water, and she had basically ashes, and she put names by each of them, pointing out that each of these victims, of course, had names and were people and persons. And so her sensitivity towards that issue at a very early point made me pay attention to Yoko. There are other artists quite huge. I want to give Elton John's original band an award for their musicianship, and even to say to Elton, after all these years, you are the best rock artist in the world. Not one of the best, yes.
While he's still around. I was at his very first concert in Australia all those many years ago.
Was that in 73? Everyone talks about the 73 concert.
It was around that time. Yeah. I was just at the end of high school, and really good stuff. So these awards are really sound like they're really taking on a force of their own. It's a finite list. There'll be 11 artists I'd like to make a statement on, and it's really about trying to understand artists from a perspective that might have been overlooked, no matter how large they were. And I hope to do a documentary from it, and that'll be a finite project. I think people should be encouraged to speak about art, which is important to them, not just what the critics say is important. Does it have its own website yet, or
it's in development? rockjusticecourt.com, but you'll see it.
rockjusticecourt.com. COURT.
www.rockjustice court COURT.com, but it is in development, but you can start to see some exciting pictures coming up.
So go visit again 6 months from now.
6 months from now.
What was it that you started off with at BMG?
At BMG, I came directly from Harvard Business School, and it was a German company, and they said, "Yeah, we want to get new talent into the record industry." Yeah, I've been to Germany. I enjoy the people there, but that's the way it was. And they wanted to hire me for corporate to analyze financial deals and such, but I said I want to work at a record label, and so I met the head of RCA Records, then Bob Buziak, and I called myself. I could make the title the manager of strategic planning, and I studied every single artist in the industry, signed all the different labels, and tried to understand what were the strengths of each label, what might be our weaknesses in terms of how big we wanted our roster to be, how big we wanted our promotion staff to be, and did a analysis of a creative industry, but used business skills in doing so, and it worked out very well.
Sounds fabulous, and it sounds like throughout your life, in fact, you've been following your bliss within your careers.
It's sometimes when you step off the normal track, actually you're off that fast track or so forth. And I remember many times I didn't like the lonely path. I'd say to myself, why do I have to do this on my own? But I'd figure out a way to make a living, and it leads to interesting projects. The Israel Emerging Growth Fund was when after I had stopped with the record industry, and people were putting money into internet companies, online companies that didn't even understand this in 93, 94, and I was trying to get funding for a record company. And that's when Israel liberalized its capital markets and the Russian aliyah, people moving in, and that's when Israel's high-tech economy took off. So I said I always wanted to do something here, and that's when I started Israel Emerging Growth Fund. I said there are different times to do different things, and now I'm 55. I'm saying that my rock passion still exists, and so I'm choosing to do work there.
Yeah, but it was really following a passion, and it kind of sounds hilarious nowadays, but in those days it really was completely a new box and innovative to even think about investing in Israeli companies. So you really were one of the pioneers.
I remember in 1989 I was at Harvard Business School, and the Japanese students used to always organize during breaks trips to Japan to see Japanese business, and almost as a joke with some of the Israeli students, we did a let's go to Israel and see the economy there. You could tell excellence. You'd go to an Air Force base and you would see absolute excellence, including flight simulators. I was not able to fly a plane. I flew it right down into the ground. But we saw a company called Teva Pharmaceuticals, and I saw a presentation as good as anything I'd seen anywhere in the world, and now they're the largest maker of generic drugs in the world. And so there was a huge change in that business environment in the 1989-90 period, which was undeniable. And then with the new population coming into Israel, but again, there was a joint government between Likud and Labor, and they decided on some economic parameters of agreement, which really liberalized Israel from a socialist to a freer market economy. And they started selling off. One thing Benjamin Netanyahu did as economic minister is he sold off all the state enterprises, no matter what the price, one by one, to try and change the emphasis from the private to the from the public sector to the private sector, and it worked.
Encourage innovation,
and it worked. Yeah,
encourage innovation in a great way. Now, Bennett, do you even realize that the majority of people would love to do things, but they stop themselves? They don't allow themselves to do things, whether it's in business or in their work, or particularly in this fabulous travel that you've been doing. Are you aware of that? And what is some of the what is it that gets you going and motivated to actually do it?
Well, actually, the travel, it's not careers do not move in straight lines, and there's times in Los Angeles things weren't working. I said, well, I'm not going to waste time. At least I'm going to educate myself on a different part of the world. And so that became, in 2011, I started, I wouldn't say obsessively so, but I spent about a third of my year away at various trips and each one gaining a different perspective on a country. And I'd like to write a book on world affairs from it. But there was a time, January of 2018, I returned from a trip and I said, I've had enough of the travel, and it's time also it's now time to focus on Los Angeles, where I live, and I made a pledge not to leave the United States for 1 year just to see what would happen. And where I gravitated is I first moved out of a tiny apartment into a much bigger place where I could actually have a home office and put those 21,000 CDs and not have to look at them. And what came from it was the music project, the Rock Justice Awards, and it also, as you do more, as your schedule gets busier, you can then take on more things. And my next goal is to continue with the music projects, but to start some writing projects as well. And sometimes that takes staying in the same place. It did hit me when I was saying to a good friend, I was saying I can't get anything done, and she says, well, Bennett, you've been 7 weeks away and now you're here for 6 weeks ready before your next trip of 7 weeks. You never really stay at home. And that hit me quite a bit. And so I said, it's true. Even if you do a little a day, you don't think that you're making headway towards a project. If you stay on task and you work at it long enough, things change, things develop, things move forward, and you start to become more efficient at it, and you can make such a midlife change. One more thing on that is any industry you want to work in, most people are looking for a certain salary level or whether they were equal to their current level. I say go to that company, volunteer, work for less, and within 2 years you'll be at the top of that company. Yes. If it is your passion.
Yes, I did a lot of that when I was coming out of school. I volunteered to work. We're coming to a close. This has been absolutely fabulous. I guess it's that Nike thing, just do it. Don't overthink it, don't over-strategize, and it really is totally inspirational to hear about just a tiny corner of what you've been doing. We'd definitely love to have you back one, and love seeing you here, and come back to Australia lots.
It's a deal.